Okay, everybody can see the PowerPoint display? Okay. We're going to talk about body dysmorphic disorder. I think this used to be one of the somatic symptom disorders, but now it's in the obsessive compulsive and related disorders. I think it belongs here more, and obviously the editors of the DSM-5 do too. But before I go over the symptoms, I think I'm just going to show you I think it's about a 4-minute clip of somebody with the symptoms. This is from the Dr. Phil show. I don't really love Dr. Phil, but you know, it's a good, the guest on his show is a good example of someone with a disorder.
Things like dots on my nose that I see. My lips are not shaped the way I would like them to be, and I feel like my cheeks are just huge.
Yeah. Okay, so look, you see the screen right there? That's you, and that's what you drew. Fair rendering?
Not from the picture, no.
Okay, well, that's what I want to show you. We then ask her to sketch what she thinks her entire body looks like, and here's what she drew. Okay, now, you again were seeking to depict something in particular here, right? What were you depicting here?
My arms are very twiggy and small, but they're long. And this whole area of my body here, I feel is overweight, and it's not proportionate to the rest of me.
And you're tipping the O scales at what?
105.
105? I've had bigger places than you on my lip and kept whistling. You know, I mean, and this is you in reality, and that's you. Do you see an inconsistency there?
I think I look hideous.
Okay, but do you see an inconsistency between the munchkin you drew on the one side and you on the other? Or you see that pretty much the same?
It looks the same to me.
Looks the same to you. And therein lies the problem. That is a distortion. But the question is why and what? And, you know, do you think part of this is an over focus on your appearance?
No, I don't really. It has become that, but as a child, I was never like this. I did not grow up this way. This is something that developed around.
That's where you are now. When I say that there may be an over focus on that, you do understand that we're at war in Iraq and we have a lot of homeless people in this world and controversies about global warming and AIDS and cancer, and that there are a whole lot of issues that are kind of getting crowded off your radar screen by a complete and total focus on how you think your thighs look?
Yes, I'm entirely aware of what's going on in the world and that I'm pushing that aside.
But that crowds it out. And the truth is, you're a very intelligent young woman and can very likely become a contributing member of society and all of that sort of thing, unless you allow yourself to devolve to the point that you stay home for 2.5 years because you don't like the way you look. So part of it is focus, and part of it is adjusting your filter and how you look at these things. So we've got to unravel this, right? If I make some resources available to you, would you avail yourself of them?
Yes.
I mean, we really try to figure out exactly what's going on and then help you to get some tools to manage that, you want to do that, right?
Yes, I do.
And your recommendation to her is deal with this right now and fix this right now.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Don't ever, ever let it get to a point where you've created your own prison.
You don't want to go where she is.
No, no, I really don't.
You don't. We'll grab it.
So any comments on what you saw so far? So whether or not somebody has the defects that they imagine, even if it's, a minor defect, the focus on it pervades the person's entire life. And it gives the impression of being something, mm, kind of superficial and not really important. But it has profound effects on people's self-esteem and ability to leave the house and ability to function. And a huge amount of people with body dysmorphic disorder have suicidal ideation. So it's a severe disorder.
Thing like,
Okay, so we'll talk about the exact DSM-5 criteria. So the first criterion is preoccupation with one or more defects or flaws in physical appearance that are not observable or appear slight in other people. So why wouldn't anorexia, we talked a little bit about this, why wouldn't anorexia just be diagnosed as body dysmorphic disorder?
Because when you have anorexia, you actually are that thin, and like your body is kind of how you could see it is how it is, and like you're extremely thin.
Yeah, I mean, they have body image distortion, so they don't see themselves as thin as they are. But that's a very specific symptom that is the thing that a lot of people pick. So it makes it a distinct disorder. And are there some other symptoms that people can name that are very specific to that disorder that wouldn't affect people with BDD?
In BDD with this like criteria, it says like that it's not really observable or appears like slight to others, but people with like who are anorexic, you can kind of like always tell.
Yeah, it's exaggerated to others a lot of the time. I mean, in different phases of recovery, somebody might appear of normal weight and still be very psychologically ill. And a lot of the programs now require that people restore their initial body weight, even if their initial body weight was a little overweight or even overweight, close to obese. They want people to get back on their usual growth curve. So where they were BMI percentage wise as they recover from anorexia. So what it has in common is that they both have this imagined flaw in appearance, in that, in the beginning at least, people with anorexia imagine themselves as fat when they're thin. And people with BDD imagine flaws being bigger than they are or existing when they don't. But there are such very particular symptoms to anorexia, and it's common enough that they've created a category of its own for it. And there are a whole set of very specific risks that go along with that disorder. Like the death rate is something like 1 in 8 in anorexia, due to suicide or due to complications from starving oneself. So, because of those things, there's a separate disorder, even though they're really similar in terms of the compulsions that people have and in terms of obsessions that people have. So you can see why it is in the OCD and related disorders category. The obsessions are how preoccupied they are with this defect in their appearance. And then the compulsions are things like repeatedly checking in mirrors to check on, their skin or their nose or their, this woman thought her arms were too thin and long, and that another part of her body was out of proportion with the rest, and that her cheeks were the wrong shape and things like that, or dots on her cheeks, I can't remember. So repeatedly checking on that, those are the compulsions. And they're supposed to cut down on anxiety, checking to make sure they haven't gotten worse, or maybe they're going away, but it doesn't have that effect. And then mental acts, comparing oneself with others, right? Oh, let's compare my nose with that person's. And that's a clear response to being so worried about that part of someone's physical appearance. So it causes clinically significant distress, definitely, because the person can't stop thinking about feeling deformed, literally deformed. They think it's the first thing anyone will notice about them, and they think it's horrible enough that it should interfere with their ability to go out. So what's going to be a comorbid disorder with this? What's going to co-occur with BDD? What other diagnosis may they get?
Maybe agoraphobia.
Yeah, some people find it impossible to leave their homes. So some people don't go to school, don't go to work, and so it leads to significant dysfunction, impairment in important areas of functioning. So this is a rule out. This is a kind of criterion D is kind of a differential diagnosis criterion. It's not better explained by concerns with body fat or weight in an individual whose symptoms meet diagnostic criteria for an eating disorder. So if it's only weight and body fat, and if they also have symptoms of like restricting or compensating for eating by purging or over exercising and things like that, if those are their sole symptoms, they're going to be diagnosed with an eating disorder, not body dysmorphic disorder, right? And this is body dysmorphic disorder is very similar to OCD. It's just very specific obsessions and very specific compulsions. And they're common enough that it warrants having its own diagnosis. The obsessions are the imagined flaws, and the compulsions are the constant checking or trying to get rid of the flaws. So BDD is far more common than people used to think. It's 1 to 2% of the general population. So that means, if you have 3 classes this size, there's one person likely in the class that has it. It's probably a slightly higher prevalence in your classes because of the age group that you're with, right? This is an age group that particularly emphasizes looks and appearance, right? So just as certain sports that emphasize leanness, like ballet, being a jockey, just as there's a higher prevalence of anorexia in those pursuits, there's a higher prevalence of body dysmorphic disorder in people your age because it's kind of a higher, it's of higher importance at this phase of your life than it is for other people. I mean, in general, I'm not saying it's everybody in here's first priority. I'm just saying in general. Oh, I didn't realize it said this right after 4 to 28% of college students meet the criteria at some point. So you can see it's much higher. So that'd be as many as, if there's like that 28 of you in here, then, there's definitely somebody in this class who has it. And probably if there's 30 of you, it's more like a quarter of 30. Let's see, 4 times 8 is 32. So there'd be more like, 5 or 6 of you with body dysmorphia in here if the prevalence was that high. Right? So that's huge in your age group. This is one of the only anxiety related disorders where it's seen equally in males and females. And does that surprise anybody? I mean, who do you usually think of as more preoccupied with their appearance?
You mainly think that women are more prone to care about their appearance than men.
Right. So based on what we've learned so far, which is that in general, women are much higher, have a disproportionate rate of most of the anxiety disorders, and women tend to be more self-conscious about appearance. You would kind of expect there to be a higher rate of BDD in women than men, but there isn't. Okay. Many remain single. A lot of people pursue plastic surgery. Does plastic surgery work for them?
No, not really, because then they still find the flaws.
Right. You see the cases of people who just keep going and getting more and more plastic surgery. It tends to not kind of quiet that beast. It's not that there really is a flaw that can be corrected. It's that the person is hypervigilant for flaws and sees flaws where there aren't any. So they often, think the plastic surgery wasn't good enough, or they need just a little bit more. And, so it just keeps continuing. And some plastic surgeons, have some psychological assessments that people have to take before they have a surgery. And some people, especially before a second or third surgery, but people can plastic surgeon hop too, right? They can just go to a different one. If somebody says, wait a minute, you've had 3 surgeries on your face and you don't have any flaws, what's going on here? They can just go to another one, and there's not like a really good communication network between them to make sure they're not doing too much work on a single person. And this usually runs a lifelong course. So it's devastating. It interferes with functioning in terms of even leaving the house, and it causes a great deal of suicidal ideation. So this is a clip, I think this one's from Australia. And this one shows the suicidal ideation and the agoraphobia in more detail.
In a world where looks and image are everything, imagine feeling too ugly to even step out the front door. So ugly that you wanted to kill yourself. It might sound ridiculous, but for victims of a little-known mental illness, it's a daily reality. No one knows what causes body dysmorphic disorder, or BDD, but it leaves once healthy teenagers crippled by their imagined ugliness. It's insidious and it's potentially deadly. Tonight, in what is one of the hardest things they'll ever do, 4 brave victims step forward to tell their story.
I'm really disgusted by how I look. I look at it and just think, you are so revolting.
This is how 15-year-old Kiara Noakes spends most of her day every day.
One morning, I sort of woke up and went, oh my God, I've looked like this for my whole life.
What did you see?
I just see it's horrible. I just see it's so ugly.
Kiara suffers from a virtually unrecognised mental illness called body dysmorphic disorder, or BDD. It hits healthy, normal teenagers, leaving them devastated by self-loathing.
I just felt like I was just completely different from everyone else. I was just like sort of an alien amongst humans, really.
I felt like I was so ugly, so scarred. It was the horriblest feeling.
On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1's the worst, how ugly would you rate yourself?
I was definitely 1. The ugliest.
It's been 2 months since her stepped foot outside her Melbourne home, other than to see her doctor. No school, no parties, no teenage life. Instead, bizarre rituals, hour after hour. So would you go an hour without looking at yourself? No. Would you go half an hour without looking at yourself?
Perhaps. It would really depend. If I could touch my face, if I could feel it, I could probably go half an hour. But then after that, I'd have to check anyway. So I'd probably just check.
She was a happy-go-lucky child, but when Kiara turned 13, this baffling obsession took hold. Kiara's doctor is Melbourne psychologist Don Jeffries, an authority on BDD.
Tell me, you've been touching your face often?
Yeah.
Show me how you've been touching it.
Usually I just sit like that so that I can reach up.
It's terrifying for her, very debilitating and extremely distressing. This is one of the core features of body dysmorphic disorder. For the sufferer, it's an extremely distressing illness. It's a fear of imagined ugliness. The point of ugliness may not be visible to anybody else. And this is one of the concerning issues about body dysmorphic disorder for the sufferers, that nobody can see my ugliness.
I would just be checking any parts of my skin around here.
Looking for
flaws, just looking for scarring. No one else could see them but me, but I was checking just everywhere, just looking for them.
22-year-old Nadine Tisdale is a beautiful girl who sees only that she's ugly. She has attempted suicide 5 times.
I already had slashed my wrists, and I used to bang my wrist up against a steel rod when I was in the bathroom.
American studies reveal half of all victims of BDD try to kill themselves.
It's hell. It's pure hell. That's right. When I was going through it, I would rather be dead than have to go through the pain of living every day.
Until last September, there was nothing Nadine couldn't do. She was an A-grade university student and a promising model. And then, as if a switch had been flicked, she became fixated by barely visible stretch marks on her thighs. She was convinced they were spreading over her body. When you saw the scars spreading, how overwhelming was that feeling?
It was horrible. And I just said, look, I can't take this anymore. And I went into my mum's room and I got out some pills and I washed them down with some alcohol and slashed up my wrists. And I just lay down and just waited to die.
This was the Dean's bedroom. And this is where you found her. Yes, I found her there. You'll never ever forget. Never forget. Are you glad she found you? I am now, but at the time I wasn't, no. No matter how often BDD sufferers are told these so-called hideous flaws are in their imagination, their reflection tells them otherwise. But why do they see something no one else can? Well, the short answer is we don't know. Doctors are at a loss to explain what triggers BDD. It seems to strike randomly, a tragic luck of the draw that affects women and men equally.
So, comments, impressions, questions?
Is there like any kind of treatment that they've found that like helps or no?
Yeah, I mean, it's really similar to OCD and other, anxiety disorders. So, what works for that? Anyone? What works well for OCD?
CBT.
CBT and, particularly exposure, right? With response prevention, which means that they, look at themselves, look at their flaws, go outside, see people, show people their supposed flaws without the constant checking, without, all their lotions and or makeup or whatever it is that they do to hide or try to fix their imagined flaws, right? Somebody saying, yeah, it's interesting that it affects men and women equally because it seems men may be less open about suffering with it. I know that used to be one of the theories for why women have higher rates of depression, that men might be, less likely to report symptoms of depression. And you might think the same thing about BDD, but that as men become more likely, as there's less stigma about asking for help, depression still remains very much, like there's still a big gender differential, and there isn't in BDD. When the girl was with her therapist, touching her face was that exposure therapy. I don't think so, because she was saying that was one of her checking behaviors. So, and she was saying I could go for a half an hour without looking in the mirror, but only if I could touch my face. So she would check whether, on how ugly she thought her face was by touching it. So I don't know if she thinks she has acne or, I don't know, but it was more of a checking thing than it was exposure for her. Would medication be helpful for this, since they mentioned there isn't a known cause? Yeah, what do you think what do people think the medication's going to be? Remember I told you what to guess?
SSRIs.
SSRIs, yep. So SSRIs help with anything that has anything to do with ruminating, thinking about the same thing over and over again, stuff that's not helping you. It helps you pick, it helps you have more of a choice what you're going to think about. So that's like a welcome break for people who are thinking about, I'm too hideous to live all the time. It's nice to be like, I have to stop thinking about that. I'm going to think about something else, and to actually have a choice. Because if they could do that on their own, they wouldn't have a disorder then. They wouldn't have the diagnosis. Right? And not everybody who has BDD is a model. I mean, they like to show attractive people in those clips because it makes it more, it like romanticizes it more. There's just normal looking people who think they're absolutely hideous who get BDD too. Right. So the causes, they don't really know. With most anxiety disorders, though, and like OCD related ones, it looks as though there's a big heritability component, like like it gets inherited. And obviously there's going to be environmental impacts too, like stressors. Like if you remember the diathesis stress model or the reciprocal gene environment model, things are going to interact, but there's definitely, more so than other disorders. There's a clear genetic part of the cause. The thing that they don't know is which anxiety or obsessional disorder is going to come out. People tend to inherit the tendency for anxiety and to obsess. They don't, but then it's not like somebody had, the mom has that particular one, BDD, and then the son has it, and then the son's offspring have it. It's more that the anxiety runs through generations, but you don't know which anxiety disorder it's going to be. You see what I'm saying? Okay. So they don't really know what causes it, but um, it seems like environmental stressors can be what makes it come out, right? Like you can imagine that BDD is likely to, you might have a genetic predisposition and then you go through puberty, and that's stressful. And that's going to make it more likely to come out. Then you go to a new school, right? Or then quarantine happens and everyone's on Zoom, you know. And I was talking to people about like why Zoom makes people more self-conscious. And I think it's because they were saying that like in class, not everybody can see you. And, if you're in the back, they can't see your face. And, there's ways to kind of hide. And in Zoom, everybody can see you straight on. Sorry, am I making everybody really uncomfortable? So that was why, that was an explanation for why Zoom is harder than being in class in person, because we talk about it a lot, like professors and teachers talk about it a lot. So yeah. All right. Can you think of another environmental stressor that could make people more likely to develop this?
Could bullying be one? Like in
Oh
school?
yeah, definitely. Right.
Would one also be like if their culture has like a way of like I know they used an example in the book. I think it was the children who wear rings on their neck to make their neck longer.
Oh yeah. 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 So maybe, before they start that process, or maybe, yeah. Oh, and somebody's saying how a certain body type is praised in society. You know, yeah, there are some big cultural effects, right? And some of them are good, like the body positive movement is probably a good thing. Um, but some of them are just promoting one type of person, right? And can make anybody who's not that exact type of person feel worse, right? Um, I think, I think TikToks have freaked out a lot of the teenagers I know. Like from my kids don't watch it. My twins don't watch it. The triplets do. My husband's triplets. And I think the super skinny girls doing dances, like Charlie, have kind of wigged out one of the 15-year-old girls. And then I have a nephew who's 14 and he thinks his jawline isn't sharp enough. And I think that there's a lot of like TikToks where people are like, look at that jawline, you know, and it's like, when did people start focusing on jawlines as a thing, right? I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think? Could TikToks make people feel worse about their appearance?
They've done trends that really do emphasize specific parts of a body in both men and women. For guys, it was the jawline thing, and then they do eyes too, and then they do like an hourglass figure thing. So they do emphasize specific parts of the body.
Right. Yeah, that could make you kind of, you know, that could make you really scrutinize yourself, you know, like self-inflicted social anxiety disorder, right? Yeah, and as culture changes, like when I was in middle school and high school, like a huge butt was not the look, right? And now, I mean, at least on TikTok and like, you know, the Kardashians and everything, it's like a big deal. I would have been in trouble, you know? So depending on what's popular, you know, you could have a tougher time or an easier time, right? Okay. Any influencer could do that to teenagers because people want to be like them. Yeah, and sometimes it can be pretty random what comes in style at any moment, right? Um, so parents are like, what? What do we do now? You know, because you have no control over what's going to become something somebody has to be all of a sudden. Okay, yeah, so the treatments for this parallel cognitive behavioral therapy. So exposure is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy. Not all cognitive behavioral therapy incorporates exposure. Okay. So there's some cognitive behavior therapy that just says, let's take your unhelpful thoughts and replace them with helpful thoughts, right? And that's not necessarily exposure. Right? So exposure is doing the thing you're afraid of, the thing that's most upsetting, like not wearing makeup or going somewhere where there's no mirrors or going somewhere where you don't know anybody or going somewhere where you have to wear shorts and you think you're that person who thinks they have stretch marks all over their legs. And again, SSRIs work for OCD. And there's definitely differences between cultures, right? The example of, I don't know how to say it, Teijin Hyofusho, that's kind of a combination, it's kind of a cross between social phobia and body dysmorphic disorder. It's a Japanese form. And it occurs in about 10 to 20% of Japanese people. So it's, there are differences in culture, right? What's the difference between American culture and most Asian cultures? Can anybody name one? Who values individualism over collectivism? Who's more about the group than the individual? Who wants people to be unique and different? And who wants people to be more the same?
I would say American culture is more diverse when Asian culture is a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I mean, American culture values people who, you know, like the hero who goes out on their own and doesn't care what anybody says. They're gonna go do their thing, right? Like, actually, my twins are identical, and their teachers used to be like, you know, they really stick to each other a lot at recess. And I was like, oh, that's horrible. My kids play with each other, you know, but they wanted them to like branch out from each other, you know, and after kindergarten, they would let them be in the same class if I like made a big deal out of it, but they wanted them separate so they would develop their own unique personalities, right? And we have sayings like, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and, you know, like, oh, look at the one singular sensation and chorus line, like standing out, you know, and then I don't remember whether it's Chinese saying or a Japanese saying that the nail that stands out gets pounded down. That's kind of the direct opposite of the squeaky wheel gets the grease, you know, like kind of giving up your own individual needs for the good of the group is kind of the value there. So people there get more nervous that they're offending other people with things like bad breath or body odor. And this is 10 to 20% of the population. The way they move, if it stands out from the way other people move, body shape or aesthetics, that's similar. It can also be aspects of your mind, though, if you think differently than other people. That's more likely in Japan to cause a form of social anxiety. So there's kind of a combination of things. There's like the social element and the physical element. And the physical element is the body dysmorphia, and the kind of psychological way you think element is the social anxiety. You know, oh, they're going to think I'm weird because I'm different. I'm unique. And here, everybody's trying to be unique, right? Everybody's trying to stand out on social media, right? Well, by being exactly the same as everybody else. I don't know. Let's see. So, yeah, it's kind of a combination of both. And it's very culturally embedded, and it's very common there, more common than body dysmorphia is overall. Okay. So, plastic surgery. 76.4% had sought some form of plastic surgery, and 66% were receiving it. It's not really a good idea for people with this disorder to have plastic surgery because they're very unlikely to be satisfied with it. The statistics are really bad for, you know, happiness with the outcome. So, and there are side effects associated with it, and it's expensive, right? And it looks like up to a quarter of people who go to get plastic surgery might have body dysmorphic disorder. Okay. And sometimes people feel even worse. Sometimes they think they've deformed themselves worse after they get things done. So sometimes symptoms even, you know, deteriorate further after medical intervention. Okay, so suicide. You saw a woman, the model, who had 5 suicide attempts. 80%, I saw another study right before class that was more like 59%, but either way, it's way too much. 80% of individuals with BDD experience suicidal ideation, meaning thinking about killing themselves during the course of their lifetime. Between 24 and 28% have attempted suicide, and 2.8% of people with body dysmorphia kill themselves every year. And that is 4 to 13 times higher than the general rate, the general population rate of suicide. So if someone has this disorder, the likelihood that they're going to commit suicide in the next year is 4 to 13 times higher than that for somebody who does not have the disorder in the population. So that's why it's such a serious disorder, because people will say, oh, it's not a big deal. That person's just got a silly thing that they're neurotic about, right? But, it does bring to mind like an important kind of diagnostic question. Usually in abnormal psychology, things get kind of separated between whether something's a neurotic problem, like somebody's being neurotic, or somebody has a psychotic disorder. And psychosis is when somebody's having hallucinations or delusions or really super disorganized thoughts. And hallucinations are seeing, hearing things that aren't there. And delusions are faulty thoughts or beliefs that are very unlikely to be true. And then when people have neurotic problems, it's like worrying about things or being sadder or more angry about things than most people would, right? And then this and anorexia and some other things are kind of right down the middle, right? It's close to a delusion, isn't it? They're almost like they're seeing something that's not there, right? They're seeing stretch marks that aren't there. They're seeing dots on their cheeks that aren't there, right? They're seeing length on their arms that isn't there. So the distortion is so extreme that it's almost like a hallucination or a delusion, but not quite. So people think of it as this frivolous thing, just self-consciousness, but it's way more severe than that. Partly because the symptoms, of being that close to a delusion or hallucination, and partly because the outcome of feeling suicidal or actually attempting or even completing a suicide, right? Okay, we'll stop there. Is everybody ready for the exam? Everybody has seen the study guide, knows what to study. Okay, any questions? Okay. All right. Well, I will see you guys next time. Good luck studying. Bye.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, is the study guide what you posted on Brightspace? You had a student on Friday?
Yeah, it's the study guide is right after, I think, it's either right after week 4 or week 5 under content in Brightspace.
All right. Thank you.
When is the exam again?